Hello, and welcome to the Medicine Mermaids podcast, stories of womb, water, and womanhood. We are your hosts, Naomi Maharaj and Naomi Ring. And in this podcast, we're here to share real stories on all things women's health, embodied spirituality, and ancient feminine mysticism. We value authentic, sovereign expression, and our greatest hope with this podcast is to awaken the unique medicine that lives within each of you. So, the title of today's episode is Dancing Through the Spirals of Grief, Navigating Loss, Heartbreak, and the Alchemy Within Our Life and Death Cycles. So, this is a big episode that we're really excited to dive into. So, we're going to briefly introduce each of ourselves and we'll dive right in. So, my name is Naomi Maharaj. I'm a women's holistic health practitioner devoted to guiding women on the path of self reclamation and embodied sovereignty. My work weaves together body image healing, womb care, and female health through modalities like clinical herbalism, holistic pelvic care, psychosomatics, and subconscious reprogramming. I support women in remembering the divine beauty that they are and in attuning to the deep wisdom and medicine within their flesh.
And I'm Naomi Ring, an integrative somatic healer, grief doula, and astrologer supporting women to embody their wholeness and root into who they truly are. My main tools are evolutionary astrology, family constellations and trauma healing, and the Akashic Records. I integrate ancient practices, devotional dance, and subconscious reprogramming to guide women on their journeys home. And like Naomi shared before, this episode is very dear to our hearts as we want to bring and have a conversation on something that is superhuman that happens to all of us at some point in our lives, and that is the journey of grief, of spiraling through grief, of navigating the losses in our lives, of connecting to the love in our hearts that sometimes has nowhere to go when we experience this grief. And bringing our own personal connection to it, our reflections of it, asking each other questions. You know, by now, if you listen to some of our older episodes, you know what our vibe is. And we really just have the intention of having a very raw conversation of what is truly a portal and then like an initiatory passage that happens to all of us in different ways, in different stages of our life. And it's just part of the life and death cycles. Grief is literally part of life. That's my belief. And we're here to talk about it. So yeah, we also discussed this before. It connects a lot with the medicine of the mermaids as well. Connecting to our inner waters, being attuned to, the waters is something that has flow and movement. It's constantly in that kind of like spiraling. It's something that has so much it's dynamic. The words aren't coming to me exactly how I see it. I'm much more of a visual person. Sometimes it's difficult for me to describe it, but what I'm meaning to say is like, water is so fluid, so many times in life there's like big waves and smaller waves, and that's just kind of how it is for us. And so I know that the mermaids really have a capacity to also connect to grief as a way of healing. And I'm sure Naomi can bring your own words to this as well. So yeah, this is also part of this like conversation today as well. Anything
Yeah.
you want to add?
Yeah, I love the mermaid work that we do, right? The name of this episode or this podcast is The Medicine Mermaids. And the reason we named it that is because Naomi and I have such a strong connection to the frequency of the mermaid, whether we're talking about it archetypally, symbolically, or if you believe in mermaid swimming in the sea. The mermaids are beings of waters. They're the stewards and protectors of the oceans, of the rivers, of the waterfalls, such a precious resource on our planet that is truly precarious in this moment in time. And the waters are the keepers of the emotions, right?
Mm.
Emotions, energy, and motion. And as we know about water and the hydrological cycle, water's always moving from the rains down to the earth, into the aquifers, through the rivers, and within our own bodies, right? Because we are mirrors and reflections of the planet that we live on. We are 70% water by volume, just like the planet, right? We are also influenced by waters flowing through us, by the moons, by the tides. And so grief, it's such a big emotion, right? For myself, I'll say grief has been the most potent, powerful, big emotion that has been the most difficult to learn to work with, just because in our society, there's very few spaces for grief to be met and to be honored and to be felt and seen in the way that it deserves, because it is a portal into life and death, right? Like you said, every human who's alive is born and dies and experiences life and death in infinite ways and times throughout their lifetime. And where do we see spaces for the different kinds of life and death to be
Yeah.
honored, right? So,
Yeah.
so I'm excited to dive
I
in.
love I love the passion that came through you, and I'm so grateful for your eloquence when you when you express yourself because I am very often like influenced by my mood and what's going on internally, and at times I really lack words. So it's funny to have a podcast where you have to speak, and sometimes it's like I wish I could just drop my brain and draw a picture for you. And I'm like, thank God you just speak, woman, because you just said literally everything I could like hope to be able to to say. So, guys, like rewind and listen to this again because that was so beautiful. Thank you.
But I think that that is such a good example of the frequency of grief, right? Because like
Yeah.
when we're in the deep spirals of grief, oftentimes what's moving through us is not something that can be verbally explained,
No,
you know?
no.
Like we'll talk more about this in the episode, but in the
Yeah,
times that I've been in grief and my friends come and they say, like, let me hear you. I'm like, I'm just gonna be repeating the same thing over
yeah,
and over. And sometimes I don't even have words for it. So I think
no.
like this is exactly what needed to be shared and
Yeah.
expressed about
I
grief.
I also want to add like, we're for our listeners, like we both literally are in moments of grief in our life, and that's why we also chose to bring this now. And I can say for me, it's definitely, like you said, there's not always words, and that's why with my work, I choose, and we'll get there, but I choose to dance through grief, and that's why I call my beautiful baby dancing through grief, because it is what helps me express what's going on when I don't have words, and it's a language in and of its own, and grief really has many expressions. It comes and goes, and and it comes again, and it's really like you said, it's we're navigating it multiple times in one lifetime in different ways for different reasons. It can be bigger and it can be smaller, and it's still grief. Grief knocks at your door in the most unexpected times, and it doesn't always make sense, and it also doesn't
Yeah.
always have words. So yeah, yeah, I'm excited
Yeah.
for us to dive in deeper.
Yeah.
Shall we
So
begin or
yeah,
anything more
let's
to
get
add?
started. No, I think we're good. So Naomi and I, we have this kind of structure of asking each other questions
Yeah.
on this topic. So we'll just dive straight in.
Yeah. And anything that we might need to add in if we haven't will just come, I trust. So yeah, first question for Naomi Maharaj. We spoke before, and I wanted to ask you about your experiences that you've had with grief, and you said you have been extremely creative in times of grief, and so I wanted to know if you can share more on that.
Yeah, sure. So throughout my life, there have been a few moments, especially in the last 5 years, that I have been definitively in a grief spiral. The biggest one, which was a very creative time for me, was in 2021 when I was processing a breakup with my first boyfriend, who, was the love of my life and in many ways still is, will always be that first love of my life. And when that relationship officially ended for me, it took a few years. It took about a year and a half for me to really process the breakup, for us both to process it because it was long distance and for it to be actually final, for me to send a message out to him that said, please don't reach out anymore. This is actually over. it was a journey. It took a long time. It took a lot of um, kind of steps to get to the point where I can fully cross the threshold of the grief. There were like a few moments before, and then there was the moment. And in that moment, I shattered into a million pieces and I essentially died. I never was a crier, but I was crying all day, every day for several months. I didn't have an appetite. I wasn't hungry. And if you listen to the last episode, you heard about a bit about my story with eating disorders and binge eating. And so for me to be the complete opposite, where I'm actually unable to eat and feed my body, it was a really interesting experience to go through that. But the when I got through that initial difficult moment, eventually there was this little spark of energy that moved through me, which was this creativity. And it was almost like this light, not at the end of the tunnel, because there was a long way to go for me to get out of that tunnel, but it was this little flame walking with me through the tunnel. And
Mm.
it was this creativity. And I started feeling this words flow through me, like words coming to my mind that needed to be written down. And it was just words coming through that needed to be said to this ex-partner. It was just emotions that wanted to be expressed. And so, whenever I felt the words come through, I would pull out my phone and I had a notes and I just would write it all out, just like stream of consciousness, everything that came. And it was like the only thing that I wanted to do, right? Like I was a normal human doing a job, going to school, living my life. After that initial phase of like, I can't do anything but cry, right? It took a few months. Eventually, I got to a place is okay, I'm a human again. I need to do my things. But this creativity was this opportunity throughout my day for the grief to be felt and to be seen and to be expressed. And I would go to the bathroom, I would, cry and I would like write the notes. I would write the poem on my phone. And over the course of like a year and a half, I was going through this where once a day or a few times a week, there would just be this transmission. It felt like a transmission from my soul of words that just needed to be expressed. And I ended up writing a book, not a book that, I would publish or anything like that, but a book for myself of like more than 100 different poems. And I wrote it and I wrote it. I typed it out. I printed 3 copies of it, one for myself, one for this ex-partner, and then one to be burned because I really believe in the alchemical process of grief and of it, the grief being in your hands, right? Like the book was almost as if the grief I felt were now put onto paper and it's here. And the act of burning that is the alchemy of that and transforming the grief into freed energy that can become joy or can become love or can be a new relationship. So I burned it and I still have the 2 other copies. I don't intend to give it to the ex-partner, but I just wanted to have the possibility one day. Um, so yeah, so it was a beautiful part of me to meet in the abyss of grief. It was really beautiful. And when I
Mm.
enter little grief spirals like I'm in one now, I notice it pops up. It pops up that desire and it's beautiful. I almost miss it when I'm not in the grief spiral.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow. That is so potent and powerful and beautiful. Like, what a way to express what the heart longs for and what it feels, and, to give it a voice. I feel like that's such a resource in one's life to have a way to connect with the heart and give it a voice. And for everyone, it's gonna look different, right? But I'm very sure your heart is so grateful for you and that capacity, that deep capacity to feel. It's a gift. It's definitely a gift.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you for sharing that.
I think there's something about it that it's like grief is a feeling and feelings can feel invisible and also so temporary. But
Yeah.
like when we go through the death that is our our grief spiral, there's almost this desire to make it real, to make it concrete. How do I make this concrete, right? Because the relationship ends, it's gone. The person
Yeah.
dies, they rot in the earth. Like there's this transformation that's always happening, but how do I make this experience that changed every fiber of my being and almost make a monument for it so that other people
Yeah.
can see it and know it. And I think that that is what the creative fire is intending to do. It's forging
Yeah.
it
I
into
mean,
existence.
that's a longing we have, right? For some reason, instead of just letting a body decompose in the earth, we put it in a casket and we put like some kind of plaque to show the name. And it's this permanence that we desire to show that something was here, something happened, it existed, it was real, and it's still gonna be real through us, right? Through our heart, through our feeling, through our longing, through our connection to the thing. And it makes a lot of sense to want to create something, and I will talk about this probably more later or just now, basically, but there's all kinds of grieving journeys. And you already mentioned, right? Grieving an ex-partner, grieving someone who passed away, like they look very different also. And I've said this also to a friend of mine recently who's also going through immense grief. When for example my father passed away when I was 18, and I truly knowing many different kinds of grief, like I know that losing my father is going to be an endless cycle of grief, and it comes and goes. It comes and goes, and I have no control over that, and I'm always surprised and also ready. It's part of my life now. It's been part of my life for the last 12 years, and I know it's going to continue that way. I have no expectations for that to be at some point complete and put away. I don't see it happening that way. And sometimes I think with lovers, there's maybe more of that desire of, if I want to move on, I need to like close this up. And oftentimes we can, and it's beautiful. And what is left behind is just this like warm love, this sweet nostalgic memory, but there's not like that connection to the very deep grief journey. But what I wanted to say is like actually for me, when I have grieved old partners and the love of my life at one point as well, like you shared, I had this like I think we bonded over that. We had this like
Mhm.
epic love stories, and we were both in this grief actually over these ex-partners that was like our whole heart, or what felt like our whole heart.
Wait, by the way, can we like say the weird, crazy coincidence about those epic love stories?
We can say it maybe without saying the actual like
Name?
name. Yeah, I think
Well,
so.
both of these ex-love stories, the guy had the same last name. And so Naomi and
And we're
I are
both
both
called
named
Naomi.
Naomi. So if by any chance we had ended up with these people, we would both have the same first and last name.
And it would be like the same initial, like N, and then yeah, and then the last
Yeah.
name. So we're like, obviously, I think it's better if we don't share it, just, to also
Keep their
protect these,
anonymity.
yeah, anonymity. I can't say certain words in English, it's hilarious. But yeah, what I wanted to say with that before is literally like we bonded over this, and yeah, that grief was so deep, and it takes its time. That's what I told my friend. Like, they look very different. They also take their time, and they can also last however long they need to last, right? But it's like sometimes there is some kind of like integration and closing cycle, and there can be multiple ones also with the death of, a father or anyone who has actually, passed away and is no longer physically present as well. But, when it comes to losing like a partner, like to releasing a partner, grieving a partner, when they don't die, sometimes it's way more difficult. It's so different, and it hits different as well. And
Mm.
I just bring this up to maybe normalize for people who sometimes they, like you said, in our society, we don't always have the like the acceptance of grief. There's not many spaces to talk about it, to experience it, to process it, to normalize that like it takes over your life for a moment or two or more. And it can be difficult to even normal day function. Like you didn't want to eat. Some people don't want to get up. Like, it has its cyclicality within the journey, right? We shift. We often go through stages as well within that stage of grief. And so I think it's just, yeah, to normalize for people like if you have lost now a relationship and you're like, how come I am so torn over this? It's not like my father passed away, or it's not like, my grandmother, like a lot of us experience our grandparents passing away. That's like more normal, let's say, right? At a certain age, that's gonna happen. Parents usually come later. For some of us, it comes very early, right? But then, like, losing relationships is huge. Sometimes it can be a friendship. It doesn't even have to be a lover,
Mhm.
right? And it's heartbreaking and it's a lot and we just need that like validation that it's it's a grief cycle. It has its own process and it's going to look very different one from another and it's totally valid if you are going through this in any way, even if it's old, even if it came back. That's what grief does. It goes and it comes back and it
Mhm.
goes away just to come back, and it is what it is. It's part of life, and it has room, especially if you wanna give it room, and a space. It can be very rewarding. Yeah.
Yeah, there were two points that came up that I wanted to respond to.
Yeah.
One, with the grief, the reason why we're calling it the spirals of grief is because the nature of grief is a
Yeah.
spiral, right? We may go through a hard experience of it and then come out the other side and say, I'm in so much joy, only to be in shock that a month later, a year later, 10 years later, suddenly we're met with that depth and intensity of grief again. And we may think, well, what's wrong with me? I thought I got over it. But that is
Hmm.
the nature and that's normal. And
Yeah.
a lot of people, celebrities or public figures who have gone through public grief experiences, they talk about that experience. Liam Neeson is the one who's coming up for me, who's a famous celebrity who lost his wife in a skiing accident. And I've seen, interviews with him and him talking about the experience of
Yeah.
grief in that way. So even with a male brain that happens. So if anyone out there is going through grief and thinks there's something wrong with them or like someone saying, get over it, move on,
Yeah.
get with someone else, the invitation is allow yourself to acknowledge that this emotional experience is valid and normal, but it's also not all of you, right? Like we move through the experience and we move out of it, and our
Yeah.
emotional experiences don't define us as humans, but they are part of the human experience.
Exactly. And I'm a firm believer of like the more you give space to this and you actually like surrender into it, the quicker we usually like move through it, alchemize it. And of course, I'm not saying like do it to get over quickly. Like take your time, go in your rhythm, but also trust that things naturally, like the natural like the only constant in life, this is super cliche, but I've lived it. I'm proof of it. Like the literal only constant in life is change. Like the seasons change. Like everything is in constant motion and change. And it's just like there's like no way to get stuck unless you like deliberately resist moving through something and then like you're choosing to stay stuck somewhere. But as long as you are actually feeling, even if it feels heavy and it feels like you're stuck, the more you surrender into the experience, the more you're actually moving through it. And there's just no way you're ever gonna get stuck as long as you trust and allow yourself to feel. Like that to
Totally.
me, that's like my unwavering faith when I'm in grief. It's like the only thing I know is like I'm gonna trust this and I'm gonna let myself spiral down and down and deeply into this because I know that at some point, whether it's a week, a month, a year, whether I need to go up and down through the spiral multiple times, and it's also gonna give me a lot of insight. It's gonna give me a lot of energy in different ways, a lot of life. What I love the most in one of my spirals of grief, which was actually when this love of my life guy at that moment broke up with me and I spiraled deeply into grief. What I loved the most was that I got to know myself so deeply. Like the intimacy that I built with myself was probably the biggest gift. And I was so grateful for it that I once texted him and I was like, thank you so much. Like, thank you for being part of my life. Thank you for this experience that I got to feel from being heartbroken. And It's funny. I probably did not have to thank him, but in that moment that felt like it just came out of my heart. But I was also equally thanking myself for being capable of feeling, because like the more we feel towards one side of the spectrum, the more we have capacity also towards the other, right? Like grief and joy and, like nothing else is coming up, but I think that says it all. Like it's just there, experiencing pain and pleasure. There we go. Thank you, brain. Like it's really building our capacity for all of it, for the full experience of living and feeling and being alive. Okay, before we
Totally.
continue ranting, we can go back maybe to our question.
Yeah, there was one more point that I wanted to make earlier when we were talking
Please.
about the different kinds of deaths. I think, you know, we've already established that our culture, society does not hold much space for death, but I think
Yeah.
the death that it does hold the most space for is the loss of a loved one or the loss of a pet. But there are other deaths and griefs experiences that we go through in life that aren't necessarily about another person, but are within ourselves, right? Like a woman entering motherhood, a woman getting her first bleed, a woman entering menopause, a woman experiencing a miscarriage or going through an abortion and
A
being
woman
postpartum.
bleeding every month.
Exactly. As females in this experience of living in the female body, we go through cycles every single month that are life and imbued with that frequency of life and death, and there isn't much space for that. And so even the internal transformations we go through on a month-to-month basis, right? The life experiences we go through in this biology, there often isn't much space for that, which is why there is this movement of women gathering in red tent circles and things like that
Yeah,
to honor the things that our very masculine dominated society does not remember is important or does not understand is
definitely.
important.
And also men need this. And like I see and I agree with you 100%. Like there isn't much space for it. And I also know there's like more and more space being made at the same time. Like that, right? Like both are happening. I think more people are becoming aware and conscious and like I see it a lot in women's spaces, like you said, and I believe like men are so desperate for these spaces themselves too. Like they need it and I mean, I want that for them as well. I want this for every human being. It's essential. Like, I'm sure they have their own cyclicality in some way, right? And a lot of times, you know, they also don't have the space to express, right? And so yeah, I wanted to add to the list you mentioned, which was beautiful, like losing a job, like for so many people can be huge. Moving homes, even when it's within the same city, it doesn't have to be like a huge, like moving through countries. It can just be like so many day-to-day things. Like I mean, this is like tiny ones, but sometimes I don't know if you like have this like mug that you love and then it breaks, shatters or like there's like little grief moments everywhere. Um and even nature shows us like these like fall, the leaves detach from right their branches, that life-giving force, and they fall. And we see this in front of our eyes, and they land on the floor, and we know that they began their dying process. And I feel like if we look at that and we let it touch us, it it can resonate. It can, we have this within ourselves, like every day that goes by, we are maturing, right? There's layers to our being that are shifting this version of ourselves, maybe like you mentioned, that is, old and being left behind. And now, in the newness of life, there's always something that has to die, right? For there to be life, there has to be death. And so there's always a grief in the middle of it. It's like the rebirthing process. So I find it so beautiful. I'm like I'm in love with grief. Disclaimer.
Totally. Totally.
You might think I'm sadistic, but no, I'm just like I just see
No,
the beauty in it.
no, I understand you because once you get to the other side, it's like
Yeah.
grief is this. it's a portal, right? We keep saying that word, but it's intentionally used because it is a threshold that when you get to the other side, you burst through it. It's almost like
Yeah.
this little particle that bursts open and it expands so much energy within the body. I remember when I moved past that original grief story with the ex-lover, I had so much joy in my body.
Yeah.
And I didn't mention this, but grieving him a lot was a deep dive into grieving my mother, right? So he
Yeah.
was just the gateway into the fullness of the experience of grief, and I was able to grieve the childhood that I had with my parents and all the chaos that was there and all of the violence, et cetera, et cetera. We won't go into it, but when I really purged and processed all of that, that grief filled me with so much energy. And in the process, I healed my chronic menstrual pain that I had had since my first bleed at 12, that I'd had for like 10 years, and I never thought I would ever heal.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that grief experience, I made peace with the relationship I had with my mom, but that only would have been possible if I had made space for the grief to be felt, to acknowledge there was a reason for feeling grief. And I think that's a block that a lot of people have. We like tend to be rational. Oh, but my childhood was like this and I had this. And so I didn't qualify to be going through grief. But grief
Yeah.
is an emotion, and emotions don't always have rational, um, like logic behind it. It's a feeling we
Definitely.
experience. So I had to get
Definitely,
to
and
that.
I agree. No, I agree. And same for me. Like it unlocked deeper layers of my grief process with my father. It allowed me to heal so much in my relationship with my mom. Like it unlocked my inner like teacher actually, because before that, I was like kind of dipping my toes into bringing my gifts into the world. And once I went through that grief process, like I felt I had so much to offer the world. And I began to actually like have a boost in my services and what I offer. And like, I started bringing so much pleasure and life and like room for feeling and capacity. And like everything developed from there. And so, yeah, there was a lot of healing happening. So I hear you and I agree. I felt like when you described it, it's like I felt the Big Bang energy, you know what they describe
Yeah.
of like suddenly, there was this burst of energy and there was life. And like to me, that's grief energy, the Big Bang.
Totally, totally. And also like it brings this Gehira, like warrior-esque energy to it. Like
See,
I
like
feel this like fuck it.
share.
Like you said, I suddenly had this energy to share my gifts, right? It gives this like
Yeah.
fuck it energy, right?
Yeah.
Because moving through it is not for the faint of heart. Like when you
Not at
surrender
all.
yourself to the grief spiral to get to the bottom of the well, right? Because
Mhm.
many people don't let themselves get to the bottom. It's too hard, it's too
It's
painful. But
scary. I mean, people
yeah,
think they're gonna die, and
yeah. Because you are.
understandable. Because
Because
you
you
are,
are.
yeah. The
Yeah.
the mind doesn't differentiate between like the physical death and the emotional, spiritual, psychological death. It's
Right.
almost one and the same. So of course you're gonna be afraid to
Yeah.
get to the bottom of the well. Of course you like,
Yeah.
my suggestion is visualize yourself tying a rope. Like when you're like rock climbing or whatever and you're tied on a rope and so you're like, oh, okay, now I can rock climb because maximum if I fall, I'm like not free falling. Do the same. Just visualize yourself looking into that black hole that you're about to fall into and say, hey, I'm gonna just tie a rope here for a second, make sure this is like very well tied to something sturdy that's not gonna let me down, and then jump in, and that might support. Because you're gonna get pulled back out, and it's probably gonna be by yourself at some point, and that's how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah. But you can be sure, like, if when you get to the bottom, when you do, and you move through it, it's this experience of like I'm so powerful. You come out just saying, I am so powerful, and
Yeah.
so fuck it. Fuck all the
Yeah.
insecurities I had before. And it makes complete sense that you would come
Yeah.
out just being like, I'm this radiant, powerful
Yeah.
being full of medicine, right? Yeah.
Yeah. You have really like such an intimate journey with yourself, and sometimes it's with yourself and other loved ones if you're going through something right together. It's
Right.
very bonding, of course, as well.
Yeah.
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 Okay, shall we?
Yes. Okay. So
I feel like
I
we already covered the whole thing and we can just be like, okay, love you all.
no, I think there's so much to be shared, but this is just a very delicious conversation, and
It is.
we both love this topic so much. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question, I think you've kind of answered it, but if there's anything left to say, how
Sure.
would you describe the difference in your experience between the loss of your father and the loss of previous lovers, boyfriends, or other experiences of grief? How would you distinguish
Yeah.
the experience of it?
Yeah, so I feel like I will because I went through a bit more of like how the experience was with a lover and you also shared yours and I feel like the description is there. Um Here's the thing, like before I even get to my father, like I said before, a lot of us lose, right, grandparents, which is also different because it feels a little more far away. But I'm someone that like has lost their grandparents since she was very young, at age 4, at age 7, at age 11. And then I lost my last grandfather 3 months after I lost my father. So, and it was like my mom's dad. So my mom lost like my dad and her father. And I lost my father and my grandfather. So it was like very, what a time, 2014. Love that year. Um, and beyond that, if you heard our other episodes, I'm someone that also moved her whole life. So like I feel grief is something that I knew since I was a child, like very strongly, very repetitively, very often. Also like having to leave friends behind. So like throughout my first 18 years of life, I tasted grief in so many different ways, and I have to say like the reason why today I probably work with dance through grief mostly is because that's what I had. That was my ultimate resource. So when my father passed away and I was 18, it wasn't a time that I was like actively dancing, so I went more like into sports and stuff. But the process of losing my father for me is probably very different from what it can be for any other person that lost a father or a mother. I have to say this, like nobody's experience is ever going to be the same because you can lose a parent in any age, and I also believe like there's no age to lose a parent. There's no age where it's easier or harder. There's no circumstance where it's going to be easier or harder. Some are more shocking and traumatic, that's for sure. Some are like definitely, yeah, rattling and heart shattering. But in the end of the day, right, like a loss of a parent, I think is huge, no matter what age and stage of life we're in. And and for me personally, right, because someone else might live it in a very different way, for me, what when I look at it, it's like I've had just multiple cycles with it. And there's also like the gift I received that helps the grief that I feel connected to my father is that like I had the chance to have 2 months with him before he passed away that were deeply healing, right? And that's something again that like if you grew up, let's say like me, with a father who was like very harsh and maybe you didn't have the best relationship, or it was like a relationship that was like, like mixed, complex, let's say, and he just suddenly passes away, right? It will look so different than when 4 months before he passes away, I'm told that he's gonna pass away, right? That he has pancreatic cancer, stage 4, and he has such and such months to live. And also the choice of my father, who I mean, we see this often when someone knows that they're about to die, they sometimes become softer. They suddenly have more clarity. They suddenly are more present with everything because life is kind of like, slipping through their fingers in some way. They're closer to death. And so what's truly significant and dear to their hearts becomes priority. And so my father was present as much as he could be with all the pain that he was going through. He chose not to be in a hospital. He chose to be at home until the last day of his life. He chose to spend as much time as he could with what he was going through with me and my brother. Like desiring us to be near him and sharing with us and listening. Like finally, I had a father who was not screaming. He had no energy to scream, and he had no energy to rant for hours. Like he was with us. There was something there, a softening. And it was also very difficult because I was already grieving him, right? That's the thing. My grief process began before he even passed away. So by the time he passes away, I'm not done grieving him because then a new layer pops in. But like that's, personal to me. So like I said, other people might lose their parents suddenly and they don't have that part that I lived through, and there's no better or worse. It is what it is. So in my experience, it's different also because I had that in some way well, my heart's beating like quite quickly. But in some way I had that like healing experience with him before, and that supported me immensely, knowing that my father loved me so much and actually cared for me. And everything that I discovered, that it's like super duper personal, but so I won't get into it, but I think it just what happened then is like I established a new kind of relationship also with him. So throughout all these 12 years, I have still had a relationship with my father, just in different ways. And so part of the grief is that I still feel his presence. He's always with me. He has left a beautiful inheritance. That inheritance is beyond money, right? Inheritance is wisdom that we can receive, right? It's energy. It's way beyond only monetary. So yeah, he has left a beautiful inheritance for me. And at the same time, it's the yearning to have another hug. And it's the desire for asking him what he thinks of my new boyfriend, or thinking of the day that he could walk me down the aisle or see my first child, or have him hug me when I'm scared, or have him give me financial advice because he was great at that and I suck. I don't suck, but you know what I mean? So it's that's the grief that you then experience. And I feel like him being my father in that kind of relationship, he didn't abandon me, right? Like some people might feel that way when a father passes away. There is a feeling of like, you now left and I'm left behind all on my own. But the reality is like, at first, yeah, I felt a bit more abandoned and like and bare, like almost naked, like something that was very nurturing, that was there like all my life protecting me, has now left. And so you're also grieving this layer. But the reality is like the connection that I have with my father remains. And I feel that's where I can begin to pinpoint the difference. If I now move into a romantic relationship, it'll again depend so much in the connection you have with this romantic partner, right? Most of the time, I find that unless it was one of those epic connections like we might describe where you feel that soul connection, usually that connection doesn't remain. At some point, it's like, so you're grieving a total loss in some way. Like this person does not want to be part of your life, right? You're separating. It's like at one point you knew each other, and usually what people describe and feel and grieve is, how come I shared so much for so long with this person, or for however X amount of time, and then suddenly they're a stranger to me. And my father could never be a stranger to me, right? That's the difference. This partner becomes one day a stranger to you, and your loved one doesn't. They might not be present physically here, right? So that's one big distinction already, that the grief looks different, because I can say with my deepest romantic connections, I feel like there is some sort of permanence. Not that I'm still in love or not that I'm still connected deeply, but like there's almost like I still can have a place for them in my heart. And it's like lovers will always be lovable. That's one of the phrases that, I love. It's actually a Brazilian friend of mine who has that tattooed in her. Amores siempre serão I can't even say amables. I can't pronounce it in Portuguese now, but yeah, like she got this like so many years ago when my father was passing away, I think, and like it kind of carried me through some of my heartbreaks, with romantic partnerships because that's the way I saw it suddenly. Like, yes, I can always have a space for these deep connections that were romantic, that were maybe more tender and sweet, and that maybe the reasons of the unlinking are not like as toxic or dramatic. Um, but yeah, in the end of the day, you become strangers. It's just
Yeah.
very different, and you're also grieving what could have been. You're grieving a potential, and with a parent, like I'm also grieving what could have been if my father was still present, right? Like what could have been if he walked me down the aisle, which I'll never experience. It's also in a way what could have been, but like this love and this father is something I have. There wasn't like a heartbreak in that way. So I think that's what makes it different. And it's just, yeah, I think it's quite obvious without me continuing it on and on that every grief is going to be impacting us in different ways and it's going to be touching different layers of our longing to be loved and belong and safety. Like it's many times romantic partnerships are also just kind of touching on anyways, like some childhood wounds or the relationship we have to our parents. That's why like we both shared when we went through the journey of grief with these past lovers, we also healed our relationship to mom, to dad, like, so it kind of brings us back anyways many times to what we didn't get as a child or what we longed for. That kind of safety of knowing that something's permanent, that something's not going to go away, that it's not going to abandon us, that it's here to stay. And I believe in that journey I think we get stronger the more we find ourselves and kind of like lean on ourselves as well, on our own love, on that like that love that has nowhere to go. That's a lot what I believe grief is as well, like pouring it back into our beings, letting it like spread through our whole body, letting it have a voice, right? Like you said, letting it create, letting it out, letting it flow, whether it's through writing, whether it's through dance, whether it's through just walking in nature. Maybe it's taking pictures of things you love. Maybe, we all have our resources. So I believe like that's what we need to find our resources. And maybe it's just a conversation with a friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Oh
hope
my
that
gosh.
answers.
Yeah, that definitely answered, and so much comes up. And I honestly think every kind of grief cycle we go through brings up like different file folders in our system, like going through a breakup brings up the file folders of like rejection and abandonment, right? Because they don't die. They're gonna fall in love with someone else. They meet other people. They're gonna have a baby with
Exactly.
someone else, right? And so seeing that, being a part of someone who's still alive, someone who you used to love and used to love you, but no longer does out of active conscious choice is really hard. Whereas I haven't lost a parent or a loved one in my immediate
Yeah.
family, but I can imagine that brings up different file folders, right? The same way of like,
Yeah.
just lost this job I've been in for 30 years. I'm sure that brings up
Exactly.
rejection, abandonment, or something else, right? It's also unique for
Yeah.
each and every one of us. So, yeah, I think us as Naomi and I are both Venus and Cancer is just another little coincidence that we both have. So she's called us certified
And
lover
Mars and
girls.
Libra.
Yeah, certified lover girls for sure. So when we love deeply and forever. And
Yeah,
that may not be for everyone out there. We're also daughters of
exactly.
Oshun, and daughters of Oshun are very much certified lover girls. So
Yeah.
So yeah, so for us going through heartbreak and loss of relationships, I mean, for me, it's forever. If I loved you once, I love you forever,
Exactly. That's why I
right?
said the lovers will always be lovable. I don't think it's gonna
Exactly.
apply to everyone, but it definitely applies to Venus and Cancers.
Yeah, and for me, Venus in Cancer, daughter of Oshun speaking here,
Yeah.
it was a really hard pill to swallow in that grief cycle I shared about
Yeah.
earlier to learn this fact of life, which is that every person in our life, every person, whether it's a partner, whether it's a parent, whether it's a friend, whether it's a pet, will leave us at some point, or we will leave them, whether it's through death or by active choice. That is the fact of life. We come into this life alone and we leave alone. And that is a terrifying truth
Terrifying.
to learn, to digest, and accept. And I'm not going to pretend like I have fully accepted it, right? Like I'm going through my own processes of accepting the realities of living and incarnating in a human body, of coming into this life, right? Um, but yeah, that was a pill that I had to learn to swallow to move through that grief experience. And I think there's something about being able to feel that, understand that, that allows us to get to the other side. It's one where we're
Yeah.
resisting, but I don't want this person to leave, or they can't. They're mine, right? No one belongs to anybody, right? It's a
Yeah.
gift to have someone in your life for the time that we do. And when they leave, it's the time, right? We're ready for something else.
And yeah, and sometimes it's the best thing that they could do. It's a gift sometimes when they leave. And it's okay to also not see it immediately, right? It's okay to not be able to digest. Like you said, you didn't even have like hunger, right? It's very normal. It's so common to lose your appetite and not be able to digest, right? You don't just lose your appetite. Sometimes like people have digestive changes when it comes to grief because it is a lot to digest and it takes time. And I mean, right, we're talking about the beauty of what can come if we are capable of moving through the resistances and of like moving through the grief layers and of giving it a voice and giving it space. And what happens if we can't, it's just gonna take longer. It's gonna take whatever time it needs. And sometimes that's part of it, and sometimes that's also okay. Life does not go how we expected. Life does not happen in the pace that we want. That's also something that can bring frustration, and we have to be able to accept. It's going to be a process that we can never exactly know, and that's also terrifying, and that's also okay that it is. So, yeah, I think the best thing that we can do when we're in grief is make sure we have support, some
Yeah.
kind of support. We do not need to heal on our own. It is totally fine to need people. It is totally fine. And most likely, we're gonna find that every person in some way or another can relate, And if you don't find the person that can relate, like look for someone that can, because, people who are connected to their humanness, they're gonna be very grateful also. When you're vulnerable, when you open up, when you share something, like it gives the opportunity also for the other to feel also safe and like, oh wow, like this is, yeah, it's normalized, it's valid. I can also open up about mine. Like we all go through grief almost daily. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
so important. Support.
totally. Should we move on to the next question?
Yes, we got this. Okay, so again, in our conversations before, you shared about your process with like addiction and chemical withdrawal related to grief. And I was very curious if you can expand on that and maybe share with our audience, what you mean by that as well.
Yeah. So I'll just preface this by saying, I've never gone through substance addiction, withdrawal from, you know, drugs or alcohol. However, that is a part of my lineage. It's a part of my family history. There is a history of addiction in my family. My mom is more than 15 years sober from alcohol and from tobacco. So within my lineage, there has been this ancestral journey of moving through addiction. When I broke up with this lover, partner, love of my life, I, without having ever gone through addiction recovery, almost immediately knew that that was a similar experience because in my body, not only did I feel like I was dying, but I felt like I was purging and going through withdrawal symptoms. I felt pain in my body. I felt a lot lack of appetite, like I've shared. And it's almost like this human universal understanding of what was happening in my body. Speaking to my mom as well, she gave me that insight. So for about, I can't even tell you how long because that time of my life, it's very hard to put timelines on. But for a good amount of time, um, I felt like my body was going through the biochemical experience of withdrawal. And one of the supports that I leaned on in that time was support groups. I joined a few fellowships, like recovery fellowships that were the saving grace for my journey. And one of them was like a codependency family dysfunction support group, which I won't name the name to maintain its anonymity. But it was basically my lifeboat for the year, 2 years that I was moving through this spiral. It took me a long, 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 long time to get through it. And in that, there was a lot of discussion of chemical withdrawal, right? Because many people who are in these fellowships, they are in multiple fellowships, right? And so many people come into codependency recovery, love addiction recovery, which is also something that I had to come to terms with. Like there is a part of me that is addicted to the chemical experience of being in love and of being loved and having sexual intimacy, and that kept me emotionally sick. So, through the experience of talking and talking and talking and being received and speaking with people who are in the frequency of recovery, um, was so was so healing. And one day I moved through it. One day it wasn't like that anymore. My appetite returned and I wasn't feeling the pain in my body and I returned to homeostasis. But that bottom of the well feeling that I was talking about before, like I could only get there if I moved through that experience of like the chemical withdrawal. And I think we all kind of feel it on some level, right? We fall in love with someone, we feel the jitters in our belly, we feel we meet someone we like and we're intimate and we like feel the bonding hormones, right? Like it's just part of being a human. But for myself, for example, it was obviously something that went to an unhealthy level. And so when I lost that, I didn't know who I was anymore. I lost my complete sense of self. And it was putting those pieces back together and going through the recovery process that turned me into the woman who I am today, right? I wouldn't be the woman who I am today if I hadn't gone through that. But I'm not going to pretend like it was, easy. It was a deeply shamanic feeling experience. Yeah.
That's very powerful. Wow. And it's so true. I mean, whether we're aware of it or not, I can relate to what you shared. And yeah, like the chemical withdrawal of love, of being loved and of the intimacy and all of that. It's very real. I think it definitely happens when we are like in romantic relationships and then they end. Like there's definitely some kind of chemical withdrawal there for sure of oxytocin and all kinds. Like you do feel very depleted after, and it takes a while until you feel that joy again. And like there's a lot to it, definitely. So,
Yeah.
like, very powerful layer that you brought into the grief experience for sure. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that.
There's a heaviness to it and I can feel it
Yeah.
in the air, right, as we're speaking.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why grief it's a dense experience, right? Like it
Yeah.
has the potential for this enlightenment, illumination, but like no mud, no lotus.
But
And
first, it's condensed, exactly. No mud, that's beautiful. No mud, no lotus. Love it. Yeah.
yeah. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Like
So
no darkness, no light. Literally.
exactly. So my next question for you is for anyone who is struggling to access their grief, right? They've
Mm.
gone through a deep sense of loss, but are struggling to connect with that
Mm.
grief. What insight might you have? And for someone who, on the opposite, is so in their grief that they don't know how to get out, what insight do you have?
Oh, wow. Okay. So, someone that can't access their grief. might possibly also not be able to access their joy, right? Their pleasure. Like I said before, there's a spectrum, and I feel like maybe just to begin building capacity slowly to feel connection with oneself, intimacy with self. I would say find any activity, any way that's right for you that makes you feel connected to yourself and find the support that's right for you. So it's you can't ever force someone to feel their grief, right? So like I'm saying this already taking into account that this person wants to, right? It's a person who can't but wants to. And from that point, you already did half of the work, right? And it's just like you have to find that space that's gonna make you feel that you can trust to begin to open up and be very gentle with yourself. Follow that like the slowest moving part of you. Give yourself the time and space. Like the harder you're gonna try from, the maybe the mind or like from this pressure, probably the farther away you're gonna get and feel, and the more frustrating it's gonna feel, right? So um yeah, I would say like very softly invite yourself, create spaces where you can feel safer and safer to access any emotion to begin with. Begin with any emotion that you can, and make sure you have that support because the more you feel supported, the easier it's gonna be to dive deep into that hole, right? If you don't feel that you're gonna have a way to come back out, you're probably not gonna even want to look at it. And that's legit stuff. It happens to all of us, right? Why would you go and throw yourself into a hole if you think you might die from it? Like no one biologically is gonna go. I mean, some people maybe, some people, but like we all want to live mostly. Most of us really want to stay alive. It's very normal to fear dying, even if it's part of life. So yeah, normalize all of that first. Know that it's okay. A lot of us are sometimes numb, and even me, that I can feel a lot, I sometimes am numb too. It's like it's stages. Like, definitely disassociate every now and then. I definitely do not want to feel, and I'm not always ready to feel. And I think respecting that and knowing that you must have a good fucking reason for it is probably step number one. So again, go as slow as you possibly can. The slower, the better. That would be probably my insight for whoever's struggling. No
Yeah.
pressure.
Grief is turtle medicine.
Exactly. Be the turtle. And then someone who's like deep, deep, deep in their grief and don't know how to get out. I would say, I mean, it's tricky because someone super deep in their grief, like at this point, might be looping, right? Might have a resistance also to actually letting go. Like they might be stuck in a phase of grief and not willing to move through it. Like there must be a big pain there. And on one end, I would say, like, keep on going in. You might not be yet ready to start coming out, and it's understandable. Like, we never know what the other went through, and telling someone, right, to move on, like we said before, is never the way, and we could never judge someone's experience and pretend like we know um, how long they need or what to do. On the other hand, of course, we want to connect back to life, and sometimes staying too long in one place begins to create like that mold, right? That kind of like bubbly junk. Like, I don't know how to more describe it than that, but like it, I would ask, what's the benefit of also staying in the grief? What is it giving you? What is the actual need that you have or desire? Like, I would ask just like, what's the fear of moving forward? Like get curious, maybe if you're willing, if you're capable. Accept the stage you're in, but also get curious of what's keeping you from moving forwards. And also could it be that you're afraid that if you let go of this now, then like you never can touch it again?
Yeah.
Right? Like would that be something that's happening for you? Is it that like you're afraid that you will never have permission to feel whatever it is you're feeling again? Do you expect yourself like the moment you step out that now you have to be all well and you're done? Because that's not how grief goes. And it's understandable if so. Once it becomes very, very long and that becomes your whole identity, it can be very scary. It's another kind of grief to step out of the grief, maybe, you know?
Yeah.
So also move at the slowest like that you can within it all, but get curious, ask yourself the questions, like trust in yourself to like keep on navigating this even if it changes and shifts, um and give yourself the time you need. Like that's what comes up now. I don't know if anyone was expecting something different, but I think like that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's also where like the nuance of each person's individual experience comes in, and also like the importance of a support group or like a support network. Because I think if we're surrounded by people who genuinely love us and support us and are here for our grief, they can also judge when it's appropriate to snap out, right?
Yeah.
I've heard mothers who have lost their children go through experiences of grief where they almost identify and grip onto the grief, because if they let go of the grief and they start living their life, move on, be happy, find their joy, it's almost like a discredit to the child that was lost, that they get forgotten or like they're
Yeah,
not
there's a
fully
lot of
grieving.
guilt. There's
Yeah,
a
there's
lot of
guilt.
guilt.
Yeah. And I think that that experience is part of the grief process, but it's also good to have people in our support network to move us through the process of moving out, because there is, again, an identification with it, right? Like you said, the grief of coming out of the grief. So yeah, I think it can
You
be really
know,
tough.
if sorry to interrupt, like if it's a loved one, remember that they're gonna want to see you living, right?
Yeah.
We're grieving that they left, and it's harder for us because we're still alive and without them, but they want to see us thriving and living and happy again, for sure. Like once the soul leaves the body and they elevate, even if the person wasn't of the highest consciousness, they tap into a higher consciousness, right? The soul has a shift in and of itself as well, most at least, I believe. That's my belief, of course. And so they're gonna want to see you happy. Believe it or not, they want you to keep on living. That's the greatest gift you can give them. So guilt is super understandable. And if it's like an ex or whatever, like it's understandable. Sometimes it takes time, it's difficult, like there can be a lot of anger there if you see someone else moving on and you're not moving on, and it like spirals you deeper into your guilt, or sorry, not the guilt, into the grief, and like it's a mixture then, because it's like anger and shame and frustration and more grief. And I feel like, again, like you said, and like I said before, like having the support around us, but also like giving yourself the time. Like sometimes for some people, if they have never had this experience, it could be the first time in their life that they're moving through these intense feelings, and it might be also very complex because suddenly so much more can come up. It stops being about this one thing, and a lot of other layers of the grief come up. Like
Yeah.
many more experiences come up. So also don't be afraid if it's taking longer than you anticipated. Um, yeah. I'm I know there's the extreme cases, but I think for most people, it'll take what it needs to take, and you will get out of it. But you also have to be willing to come back to life and know that like grief can still be there in different ways, and you can still feel, and you can still have your days to feel grief, and you know,
Yeah. This is
yeah.
making me think for as an analogy of like getting caught in a riptide. I've never
Mm,
gotten caught in a riptide, but like
I
living
think not.
here in Ubatuba, the beaches are actually quite dangerous. And so
Yeah.
like, you have to know how to get out of a riptide if you get caught in one. But like for those who don't know, a riptide is basically like a current at the beach where rather than the current is coming from the horizon towards the beach, it's being pulled back in the opposite direction. And so if you're just swimming there, you can get caught in the riptide and get pulled out. And most people, they try to go against the current, so swim towards the beach. But
Yeah,
for lifeguards teach us all the time, like actually let yourself be pulled or swim sideways, and that's how you'll get
exactly.
out. And so just surrender to the current because you will eventually get out of it. You're not going to get swept down and drown.
Exactly. And the sideways, I can see it as like having the support that brings you different perspectives and being open to those different perspectives, as opposed to just like being pulled and you wanting to swim against it out of this fear of being pulled. Like either surrender to it or be open to going in different directions that you didn't think that you could, right? Be open to the different perspectives. Because for me, at least, I can say that many times what has helped me move through is also being willing to listen to others and their experiences as well. Being willing to like absorb wisdom from someone else's point of view and not just staying stuck in my own has many times has accelerated my healing process. Um, and sometimes people say things in ways that can hurt us, and not everyone's like very tender and patient and compassionate. And yet there's a way that you can extract their message and their medicine, right? Not everyone's going to say things the way we wish they would. And it doesn't mean that what they're saying doesn't have some truth in it. It's just like probably the way is not the way we want. But if we are willing to just kind of like release that for a moment and like, you know, get like the essence of what they're trying to bring, because usually it's usually coming from love. Even the people who are trying to rush us or like want to see us move on and forward, they want to see us get better, they want to see us live life, they want to see us be happy. They love us, they just don't know how to handle it, right? They don't know how to like have space for what we're going through, and that's okay. That speaks about their capacity, not if we're okay or not in where we are at. So if we're capable of like extracting the essence of what they're trying to bring, that can also be very beautiful and kind of like the swimming sideways, right? So I really love that you brought that. That's I love visuals.
I love analogies.
They make so much sense. They just like what? Okay. Are we do we have like one more or is it?
We have two. We have
Ooh,
two more.
okay. Here we go.
Yeah.
So my turn to ask you, right?
Yeah.
I lost it for a moment, sorry. Okay, so we're moving forwards. How has your process evolved in self-care and nourishment through your experiences of grief, right? Because you mentioned like different experiences, and so sometimes it looks different. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny because when like I said, we recorded our last episode, we were talking about nourishment and feeding the body, and now we're talking about grief. And I'm actually going through a grief cycle now. And it's the complete opposite. I struggle to feed myself like with food to nourish my body, all the things. Um, and have learned to just accept that that's part of the process, right? I used to like judge myself or be like, you need to be better, a more well-nourished babe. But if grief is a natural part of life, because life and death is a natural part of life, then the desire or the repulsion to nourishment that's part of the grief process is also part of life. And I know it doesn't last forever, right? At some point, I'm gonna swim backwards and I'm gonna get pulled out of the riptide, and it's just part of how it is. But I do at some point need to start to prioritize my nourishment, and I'm in that place now where I have to remember to feed myself. I have to, even if I'm not hungry, I have to actively make more of an effort than I would normally when I'm in just normal homeostasis. So that's one. I need to put more energy into the desire to nourish myself. And it's not just food, but the desire to take care of myself. Because with grief from in my own body, it has this frequency of emptiness. There's an emptiness. I just want to not exist. I don't want anything in me, out of me. I just want to not exist. That is the frequency of grief in my physical existence. So at some point, for me to spiral through and out of the grief, I need to now want to exist. And part of that existing is the desire to nourish and feed my body. Another thing that has helped me in the past with grief has been um I need to take time out. Like if I'm being a mundane human, I'm in a job, I'm going grocery shopping, and then suddenly the grief spiral comes. It's like 5 minutes, I go to the bathroom, I do my tools, whether it's tapping or just placing a hand on my heart, crying, feeling, writing my poem on a phone note, whatever it is, however it is that that grief is coming, just do it. And it wasn't always like that, right? Like I used to identify with the person who struggles to access their grief. But it's like slowly by working our emotional channels, by connecting and feeling, it starts to flow more. It becomes like a river and it's reliable. It's a part of you that you can connect with more easily. And so when I would be in that spiral, it's just, I just need 5 minutes. That's all I need. More than 5 minutes, my nervous system taps out and I can't be a functioning human doing the things I have to do. But if I give myself 5 minutes, it's like this little it's like releasing the gas from like turning a gas valve, just allowing some off steam to come out. So then I can recenter and go back. And then later, when I'm at home at the end of the day, I have more time, then I can devote more energy and time to that grief that needs to be felt on a deeper level. So I think those two things have been kind of key in moving through, as well as the other things I've mentioned, being in a support, having a support network, a support group, having safe people around you who understand grief and can hold space for it, and knowing who are the kinds of people that don't have the emotional capacity for it without judgment and sending them love because each and every one of us is built differently. Our nervous systems, emotional capacities are built differently. There are some people in our life who we love deeply and they love us deeply, but aren't necessarily the right people to turn to in the depth and heart of a grief spiral and to be okay with that. So,
100%.
yeah.
100% agreed. That was beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah. All right. So, should we ask the last question of the episode?
sure.
Yeah. All right. So Naomi is clearly an incredibly skilled, talented, gifted healer. And in her intro, she calls herself a grief doula. And I think she has earned that title from her innumerous experiences of working through grief in her life. So, Naomi, I know that grief is a big part of your work. With your dance work, with your Akashic records, family constellations, all the beautiful things that you share. How does your work support women who are spiraling through grief, and how is dance involved in it?
Yeah, oh, thank you so much for everything you said, my love. I definitely also just want to say, like, I see you in your process of grief, and I feel like you have definitely like so much wisdom and insight and like really lived through it. And that's to me always very touching, because I really honor what this gives us as human beings, that like capacity to be more emotionally attuned, not to just ourselves but to others. And I find that beings who are willing to meet themselves in that spiral, they just have my heart, they have my appreciation. And I see so much courage there. And again, no judgment to whoever it's difficult for them to access that. Yeah, I feel my work can support, women and men, but mostly I do work with women, in becoming capable of accessing their emotions first and foremost, right? Like I mentioned before, that spectrum of emotions, like the more we go one way, the more we go the other. And so being capable of being in touch with grief is um is something that comes through expanding our capacity, and sometimes also very connected to the nervous system capacity, right? And expanding our safety within self, our intimacy with self. So most of what I will do is supporting women to get in touch with their inner rhythm, to listening, to their breath, to their pathways of pleasure. So I incorporate movement mostly into that kind of work, or, rituals, anything that kind of brings you in connection in ways that are not always words, although I myself also in my own experiences find that writing is a beautiful tool that I have in a resource. But I tend to create spaces where women can, through movement, kind of like discover and explore these emotions that can be very big to find words for at times. And as we move, right, like you said, like our emotions are you know, like it's water in motion in a way. And so as we move many times, we are also not just processing and integrating, we're also alchemizing. So yeah, I love incorporating dance. I have my baby project called Dancing Through Grief, and within it, there's many practices, and one of my favorite ones is a score. It's basically a work where you kind of go into a trance-like state. I like to offer women the capacity to blindfold themselves and basically um, I choose four different words that you then go and express through a movement, right? So let's say the topic will be grief, and now we're going through, I always bring in like grounding and gratitude as one of the words. Let's say resistance, pain, and anger. And so you will find one movement, right, that for you is gratitude, grounding, resistance, one for pain, and one for anger. And you will cycle through these four movements or five movements, however many I might choose for that time. And you cycle through them, and you find within that cycle your own rhythm, whether you want to go fast or slow. You find the expansion and contraction within those movements, how big, how small you want to make these movements. And for a period of time, sometimes it can be 8, 15, 20 minutes, we go into this almost trance-like state and experience this like journey. So that's one of my favorite practices. It opens a lot to work in that way. So that's, a visual representation for anyone who managed to like follow me when I describe this, in how you can get in touch. Like, we don't always need to know. We don't always need to have words. That's my belief. And sometimes just like feeling it through the body, moving it through the body is going to give us a lot of insight. So, yeah, this is one of the ways I like to just invite women into going through this journey. But in general, like, the whole basis of my work builds that capacity to feel and to get in touch intimately with ourselves, because it's a daily practice, right? We don't have to wait until we're in a grief cycle and a grief process to practice inner listening and finding our rhythm, and being like in that questioning of like, where's my pleasure and where's my breath and what do I need today? And it's like that slowly builds the capacity to go deeper into joy and pleasure and deeper into pain and grief. And like, there's really so much more I can say, but I would hope that this is already giving everyone like an idea and a feeling of how I support women. And there's, many other ways depending on what each person comes with, what they're going through, what they bring. Um, but that's probably my favorite way when it comes to movement. It's the way that I've always found for myself. Um, yeah, a channel where I don't need to know. I can just, let it move through me and it's nice, to like disconnect the mind that wants answers for everything. And yeah, with time, I trust that when we integrate and giving a lot of room for the slowness and for integration, some things are revealed later on, and yeah, I hold space like that. Oh, you're a mute, my darling. But yeah, that's the kind of spaces I hold, basically.
I love that. I feel like I'm gonna get off this call and I'm gonna do that, the score work. I feel like I feel like with grief and another emotion, anger, it can often be very hard to get beyond the mind. And so having like a very simple practice of choose four emotions, choose four movements, and just do them allows the mind to slowly start dissolving that need for control a little bit. And at one point, you just kind of click into the movement of the expression of the feeling
Yeah,
frequency itself, right?
exactly.
I noticed this with anger. I've been moving through a lot of anger through this grief cycle I'm in, and I have my practice of just like moving emotion through the voice, right? Through sound, through screaming into a pillow, moaning, right?
Yeah,
And I notice with myself, it's been time since I've done that. And when I come back to it now, I feel the brain being like, this is wrong. This is stupid. Nothing's going to happen. And there's something in the practice of just doing what the brain needs to do to feel like it has some sense of control that eventually the emotion clicks in and it's
yeah,
now in its expression. So I really like that.
yeah.
I'm gonna do that
I
after.
mean, definitely the voice is also part of it, right? Using our subtle sounds, like releasing those stored sounds that we have in day-to-day life. Definitely part of it too. And yeah, do it. I think in a group, it's very powerful with a blindfold, having the support, but also, like you said, everyone doing it on their own can also be like a beautiful experience, exploratory experience. I'm a big fan of exploring, and I'm a big fan of allowing yourself to feel whatever it is, even if it's resistance. And if you're resisting, that's fine. That's insight into where you are right now. And the biggest advice I could give someone is like, just because you met resistance once does not mean you're going to meet it again. Be open for the change, the shift to happen. Be open to meet yourself every single day anew. Just because one day you like this way of moving doesn't mean the next day you're going to like it. Just because one day you needed this kind of pace doesn't mean the next day, right? Like just being open to what's happening now? What is it that I need in this moment? And like it really starts from there. I think the more we build that awareness with self, the more these processes are like easier to hold and navigate through. And we can do it with immense compassion. And like you said, like when we become those warriors, I love to call myself like compassionate warrior. We become warriors with immense compassion for self, for others. And yeah, I would say like to close this off, like grief is literally like such a gift. It can be our way back to life in a very new, fresh way, right? Because once we go through that death and rebirth and life cycle, like grief brings so many gifts with it, and it will always show us our longings and desires and where our love is and how much of it all we have. It's like it's resourcing us. Grief can literally point us towards like our resources and our gifts and our power if we let it. And I loved again the analogy you brought with the riptide and just surrendering to it because it's literally what grief is asking from us. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
I feel like we're complete.
Yeah, a hundred
Yeah.
percent complete. I love it. Yeah. I'm soon going to open like a live face-to-face group for dancing through grief here in Israel. And I will also hopefully very soon do a Zoom international one. And who knows, maybe one day we can bring this to our retreats and, like do much more with this together as well. because I know this is like such potent work for the whole world, no matter where we are at and what we're experiencing. We didn't even touch on the collective grief, girl,
Yeah.
but you know
Yeah.
what? Like, it's okay. This is, the collective grief is an extension really of our personal grief anyway, sometimes. So in order for us to even tap into collective grief, we have to be willing to tap into our personal one. So that with that, it's like enough said.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, yeah, I'm excited for that, and thank you all for listening to us. We know that this episode was probably wavy, a little bit spirally and cyclical, like grief, and yeah, thanks for holding the intention with us to be here, to be present, to listening and being a part of this growing Medicine Mermaids podcast. We hope you enjoyed, and we'll leave any relevant links down below.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you on our next episode.
Ciao for now.